This is part 3 of the interview with Kendall, and this is a time where things started to get really, really difficult, and the impending doom was definitely happening. The roles changed immensely. Kendall really talks about how he's very vulnerable at this time. This is a time where his frustration is growing. He wants to really change directions, and it leads up to the final bankruptcy.
So what McKinley said to me then, I think looking back now, that set in motion, like me starting to rethink my time spend, and not to mention just the challenge of working with. See, the person that was the one person in that private equity team that left and was no longer part of the company, he still was an owner, but he was the one that I respected and liked the most. And we're still friends. And I'm actually having lunch with him tomorrow. And I love the guy, his family, everything about it. So now I'm in business with people that I don't really want to be in business with. I mean, I didn't go out and choose. That's the thing about when you're a business owner, you can choose who you want to be in business with. You can hire who you want to be around. You can hire and create what you want to create as far as like a community. So that what McKinley said to me that day about my daughter, about me missing games and stuff. That was a tough thing to swallow, and it set in motion, I think, my resolve to step away from the business, that I was no longer having fun. And then the second piece was I had my other son. I remember my other son, but I remember I had a couple close friends say to me like, "Hey, are you okay?" Like, "Hey, are you okay?" I'm like, "No, I'm doing great." And they're like, "Something's not right. Like something's off." And I think what they saw was that I was under a lot of stress. I was not enjoying the role, which is, I like some people could say like, suck it up, quit being such a pansy. But so anyway, fast forward to 2025. It's February, March. I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm just trying to strategize in my mind. How can I tell the private equity team, listen, I'm out? How can I also take care of my family from a financial standpoint? In that time frame as well, Mark came to me and said, "Hey, I want to take full control of Crispy. I'm basically building it on my own." And this is me interpreting this part. I can do it without you. That's how I interpreted our conversations, and we came to an arrangement that I would again, for the second time, give him what he wanted. I gave him what he wanted in being able to leave BlackOvis. He took money off the table, was able to go take care of some of his aspirational dreams, and I gave him what he wanted again. And I realized that at the end of that, I didn't want the money for a buyout. I didn't want it. I wanted to be a part of something, and I wanted to be a part of Crispy, and that's still, it's hard. But I don't know if I'm over it. But again, I'm perceived in the hunting industry as I'm BlackOvis and Camofire, and I'm Crispy. And there's been kind of a waning of that. Now people realize, okay, I'm not involved with Crispy, and I tried to make that very, very clear, in 2025. But unfortunately, I was trying to exit the business from a day-to-day standpoint. I would have sold my shares if I could have, but the company was starting to have some difficulties. The bank was starting to say, "Hey, listen, we don't really want to continue to work with you're not really the kind of company we want to lend to. You need to go find a different bank to work with." And what happened then, as everyone knows, is the tariffs happened in early April. I was on vacation actually with my family. Came back to the tariffs, and it was and the young man that was that had been overseeing the BlackOvis product, he left the company right before that. And so that landed squarely on my shoulders. And so then I was like right back in it. working like a dog, if I can remember, trying to figure out what are we going to do to manage this tariff situation, because all of the BlackOvis branded product was being built in China, minus a couple things that were built here in the U.S. and also in Vietnam. So that was a terrible time. I was accused at that point. We had been working with the same design team out of Canada since Core 4 Element. For 15 years, I've been working with the same team. New CEO comes in. He's got his guy. He's got a different resource lineup through a different company. And I'm still trying to manage this the new CEO wants to take the BlackOvis branded product and redesign it and make it better, which I was completely for, but we want to use a different source. I'm trying to be loyal to the company and then to this person that we'd been coordinating with. He was getting spidey senses like maybe the new CEO is not, and BlackOvis isn't going to use our services and our factories. And very much so. There was some behind the scenes, as you're aware, that we were going to potentially walk away from everything because it was being built in China. We didn't know. I mean, we didn't want to pay 170, 180% tariffs or whatever. I can't remember what it got ratcheted at, 135% tariffs.
Yeah.
So suddenly we were contemplating: do we just drop everything that we had committed to at the factories in China and just completely pivot into Vietnam and other markets, Egypt and some South America and potentially Philippines. So, dude, that was a terribly tumultuous time. Love or hate him, Trump created at least a situation for me and our company that ultimately was one of the nails in the coffin. And I got accused of I think the leadership team basically thought that I was getting kickbacks from the factory and said that I was negating my fiduciary responsibility. They thought that behind the scenes, I told that company in Canada, say, listen, you guys have a call coming up with this new management team, and they're looking to potentially replace you. I just felt I had to tell them that. Was it irresponsible? Potentially. Some people would say yes. But they mistook my loyalty for me trying to somehow protect this backdoor revenue stream that was coming to me. And so therefore I was trying to, it was absurd. And that accusation, which was completely wrong, was I'm freaking out of here. I am no longer going to be working in this company. I cannot work with individuals that I think they're bad people, but they're just not my people. And I'm choosing to not be a part of this on a day-to-day basis. And it broke my heart because of all the good people that I was working with and I knew I was going to be stepping away from. So June, fast forward a little bit to June, there were some troubled situations with the bank. Ultimately, in our search to try and find a new bank, and this is when I say we, I was slowly pulling myself out of the day-to-day of the business, and then I was being invited not to participate in some of these key calls. I participated in the first few calls with our banks, and then suddenly I was out. I don't know why. I think some of it was I was emotional to the business, and they didn't want me to be emotional. I'm an emotional decision maker within those parameters, right? Within those confines of those decisions. Ultimately, we had a bank that was going to take our debt on and then be our new line of credit, and that fell through at the literally the bottom
hour.
Yeah, bottom of the ninth, right? We were literally a day from signing documents, and they backed out. And our CEO, he owned it, and props to him. He made a decision in April to hold on to our inventory, to not sell, because we were afraid we weren't going to get inventory for the rest of the year. We didn't know if we were going to get BlackOvis product for the remainder of the year. So instead of continuing to sell it on Camofire and BlackOvis at whatever price we wanted to pitch, he held on to inventory, and that revenue number from that April is what broke the deal. And it's unfortunate, and you just have to make. He had to make a hard decision, and he did, and he owned it, and I respect him for that. But it was right in that time that a couple things came out that led to the filing of the bankruptcy, and I can go into those details. But I voluntarily at that point reduced my salary back down to $48,000. I didn't realize that my beginning salary with Camofire and BlackOvis and my ending salary was exactly the same.
Jeez,
and I redefined my role over a period that my new role was going to be I would come to the office once a week, and I would do product videos, which I love doing product. I would work with the new product design team, and I would write written content, and that was really more finalized about August, and then I disappeared to go hunting in September. But in June, when that whole fiasco kind of came about with the bank, it was like, I'm out of here. Like the arguments and the kind of disagreements with the CEO, and just seeing things differently, his style versus my style, and I'm not saying he's a bad person at all. I kind of liked him, and I learned some some good things from him as far as how to run an organization and be a leader. But I was just like, I'm choosing not to be in this business any longer from a day-to-day standpoint.
So we're getting close to October, which was the big bankruptcy.
Yep.
And tell me about some of the things leading up to that, and then let's get to post-bankruptcy.
Yep. Yeah.
And some narratives that came out and some other things that came out.
Sure. The one thing so my reason for doing this podcast with you is twofold. Number one, I have not influenced the narrative, and I feel like I should, finally. The narrative that was put forth publicly was put forth by someone that has no freaking clue of anything that happened within the business. His company was a very small supplier. You can read the filing, his impact was extraordinarily small, less than $10,000, of which I later helped him, which very few people know, get back. I reached out to him and helped him get over half of his loss back in product. But he's the only one. That's the main narrative that everyone has heard publicly, or whatever they've created on their own.
Sure.
So my reason of coming is it's time for me to heal and move beyond this, and B, I want to establish my perspective of what the narrative was. So the bankruptcy, when there's a few things, I'm going to probably share some details that people may or not want to understand or hear, but when banks file, and this was known, when banks lend money, when you buy a home, a bank has first position against your home until you've paid your mortgage entirely, right? Because they own you. You have a debt, you pay that debt, you finance that debt.
Yeah.
They do that because they file legally, and so now they basically own the house. You own the house, but they really own the house. When banks lend to commercial entities like Camofire Holdings Inc. was then created from the original company, Camofire LLC. They file what's called a UCC filing, and it's a Uniform Commercial Code is what it stands for, and it's a filing that legally puts them in first position, and they become a secured lender. And what that means is that should a company fold, the secured lender has first position, and they will get all of their money. So if you owe the bank $1 million, the bank will take that first $1 million, and then everyone else that's unsecured gets kind of the scraps. They get the leftovers. That's just what happens. When the bank deal fell through with the other lender, we went back to our lender, and they said, "Hey, listen, you're either with us or you're not. You can foreclose on us, or you're just going to have to be patient, work with us." That in June, they said, you guys are going to have to raise, actually before we started looking at other banks, they said, you guys are going to have to come up with what they call an equity cure, meaning the bank wants to see the owners of the company, or the company just go find new investors and come up and cure equity, meaning adding more equity so that the health of the business is a little bit more appealing to them and they feel more comfortable. So they asked us to raise 1.5 million over a 2-year period, $1 million in the first tranche and 500,000 in the second tranche. And so one of the efforts we were trying to do is find, go back to the original investors. Remember, now most of those original investors are now with that partner that left the private equity team. And unbeknownst to me, there was not favorable relations. I thought that I later learned, or at least surmised, I'm like, why are these guys not participating in the equity cure? It's because they didn't really like, their person had left or been kind of pushed out of that private equity. So there was there were some complications happening behind the scenes that I just didn't appreciate or realize that were affecting our ability to raise capital. I personally committed a sizable amount of money to the company, and the way I did it was certainly not traditional or not what was desired, but I felt at the time that it was needed, and if I hadn't done what I did, I felt like the business wouldn't have been able to succeed, and I did it to save the business, and that was in June of 2025. That's why in the bankruptcy filing I'm listed as a very substantial creditor.
Sure.
Unfortunately, when the narrative came out, that no one talked about that. But certainly it could be like, why the freak is Kendall on the ownership side, which is now part of what's filed bankruptcy, and on the creditor side in a substantial way? It was because what I thought I was doing was putting forth money to help the business and be part of that equity raise. Anyways, so the bank finally said, okay, fine, we'll deal with you guys. That was in July of 2025. The bank extended, the original line of credit ended July 22nd, and I say July 22nd because I know that date. Don't forget that, July 22nd. And they started a new line of credit. So whenever a bank starts a new line of credit, they go back to the court and they file that UCC filing. And so what they did at the time is they filed that UCC1 filing in July. Fast forward a couple weeks and they started working with us, and that was a very tumultuous time. They fast forward a couple weeks, and the board, unbeknownst to me, the other members of the board had hired, this is a private equity team, they had hired a bankruptcy attorney. We had our own in-house counsel, and suddenly I show up to a board meeting, and these board calls started happening literally on the regular, like every week. It was for me personally, it was too much. But and I applaud the private equity. They were trying to save the company. They truly were.
Yeah.
Were there motives that I wasn't aware of? Perhaps. Maybe who knows? I know that their private equity side of their company, they had a private equity arm and a restructuring arm. Their restructuring arm was printing money. They couldn't hire people enough, and they were growing that. And I don't think their private equity side was growing. They weren't really doing more deals than us. But so this guy shows up at our board call, and we're like, and it said, it's like, hey, here's this guy. He's the attorney. He's a bankruptcy attorney, and he's going to participate in all of our board calls. And I remember thinking, like, what the freak? And to me, it felt like we're preparing for the inevitable. Or we're giving up. And they didn't give up because they still tried. And I don't want to discredit their efforts. But it was odd to me. Hiring a bankruptcy attorney, some of it was probably to manage risk, right? So in that board meeting, I remember he asked, well, who else besides the bank has a UCC filing against the company? Meaning, I need to understand, like, how many secured lenders are there and how many unsecured lenders are there. Sure. Unsecured being all of the brands that we were stopping working with, and the company BlackOvis strategy in 2025 was to narrow down, instead of retailing 250 brands. We were going to retail about 25 to 40 brands and then focus almost entirely on BlackOvis as a brand, as a clothing brand, an equipment brand. And that was the new strategy. That's why our revenue was coming down. We purposely had strategized to have our revenue drop, but our net profit go up. Instead of doing 32 million, the eventual, like in 2025, we were forecasting to do about 22, 23 million. And then the plan for 2026 was to do about 15 to 16 million. But higher turning products, better margins, more profitability. So we were going to do less gross, more net. And we had structured it such, and I say we, I mean really the private equity team had devised a plan and forecast that we can pull this off. And it was ambitious, let's say, but I don't think it was impossible. And I think the team believed that it was possible. But I remember he asked that. So our house attorney looked it up, and what they realized that I later was told about 2 or 3 weeks later, right before I went on my Colorado deer hunt in late August, I was told that they found out that the bank was unsecured. The bank had just filed that UCC filing, and that previously someone at the bank had forgot to file a UCC filing. So when you file a UCC filing, there's a 90-day perfection or curation period, and at which it's almost like, hey, I buy a car and I've got 2 days to think it over and I can return the car. It's kind of like the legal way that a company can be protected. But once that filing perfects, then the bank is secured. So what was devised was, and this is my perception. Okay, this is just my perception, is that the executive members of the private equity team felt like our best strategy, and I say our, BlackOvis, was we're going to ask the bank for certain demands, and if they don't give that to us, we're going to let them know that we know they're unsecured, and if we default or we file bankruptcy before October 22nd, then they're going to be lumped in with everyone else. And meaning the private equity team, felt like that was the most responsible thing to do for all the creditors. That if the business didn't have a future, instead of allowing the bank to become secured so that they would get all the proceeds of a liquidation, that all the creditors would be on an even playing field. So, and for better or for worse, that was the decision that they came to.
Yeah.
The bank was willing to give all the concessions except for one major concession, and that was an overdraw and on the credit line. Because what happens in lending is when if you're lending against assets and suddenly your assets go from 12 million in revenue, 12 million in inventory to 8 million to 7 million to 5 million, you can borrow less and less and less and less of that against the asset. So our borrowing base kept coming down, which was so weird because we were in a healthier position from an inventory standpoint, but it was limiting how much we could borrow to then pay for incoming product from overseas and from product from some of our key brands. So we were in this really catch-22 because the bank's like, you guys have less assets to lend against, and I think that they were too. I don't think they cared, and the private equity team cared enough that they were really trying to help them understand. Listen, we've been bringing our inventory down to be a more responsible and healthy business.
Sure.
We're trimming the number of brands we're going to sell. Our revenue is going to come down, but we're going to be more profitable. And look at our projections, and we're still trying to go find enough investors. And the CEO said he was going to bring some money. I was going to bring some money, which I'd already put into the business, but was counted as a loan, not necessarily as an equity infusion. And then we had a gentleman from the outside, and the private equity person was going to bring, the main partner, he was bringing some money to the table. And then we had a guy that was going to come from the outside and bring some money. So we were there. And then literally 2 weeks before the filing happened, the gentleman that was going to bring his investment, he had a sale of a commercial building that went south, and and we asked the bank, can you please give us an extra 90 days? We can come up with this equity. We can work through Q4, land all the product, and then get us. And Q3 was actually fantastic. Like, our results were actually quite fantastic. We had negotiated, and I got pulled out of that. I was sucked into that initially, all these brands that we were dropping, but I got pulled out of that. They just said, hey, we don't want you on any of those calls anymore. But the private equity team had negotiated with all these brands that we were not going forward with and said, hey, listen, we owe you this money. We're going to pay you back this money over 2026. Here's our plan. They had done a ton of work, man. Mad respect to them. They had worked their tail off to try and set us up for success to keep the business rolling.
Yeah.
And at the end, the bank wouldn't. The bank essentially said, after some negotiations and pleadings on and the private equity team put their necks out on the line and really implored and basically begged the bank, and we're talking to the highest level back in their headquarters in Chicago, in Cleveland, basically begged and said, please give us this overdraw opportunity and give us 90 more days. And the bank, as it was told to me, essentially said, we'll take our lumps now versus later. You guys do what you need to do. So there's a little bit of a game of chicken, in my opinion, between we're going to file bankruptcy and you're going to stay unsecured, and we want these demands. And the bank kind of just said, all right, we're going to call your bluff. And I don't think they wanted to do it, but I remember when it came down to the actual vote, and I'll be truthful. Listen, I'm still a shareholder at this point. I still have responsibility to the company. Yes, I said in that final board meeting, I will not vote to file bankruptcy. I can't do that on a company I founded. And my recollection of what was told to me was, we don't need your vote anyways. And that hurt a little bit. And I begged, well, beg's probably not the word. I implored them to go back to the bank and to tell the bank, listen, we will shut down the business properly. And I remember using this word. I said, let us do it honorably. If anyone's going to liquidate this inventory, we can do it best through Camofire and BlackOvis. Please ask the bank if we can do this. And that was on Friday, October 17th, when we voted and when we let all the employees know. And the private equity team did that. And on Monday, October 20th, they filed the bankruptcy. I don't know if the bank just said, no thanks, we're not going to let you shut it down honorably. You do what you need. But I think it was just like, it was already in motion. I don't know if you remember, but so the board decided to file bankruptcy. Felt like that was the most responsible thing to do, to keep all the creditors on the same playing field. Because if they would have allowed the bank to become secured on October 22nd, the bank would get everything and everyone else would get nothing. Now, it may come out to that everyone else gets nothing, or very little. I don't know. That's still in motion. So the bankruptcy is filed. I did something on that Friday, and on that Monday, I rallied a number of employees. That happened in the morning. And I begged employees and said, listen, if any of you want to stick around, we have open orders. And the private equity team said, shut the websites down. We don't want to take people's money, and we don't want to not ship the product that people have committed to. So even though the filing was going to happen on Monday after that last request to the bank, so I rallied a bunch of employees and we started picking orders and shipping orders. Came back on Monday, and I think there were 6 of us. I know you were there, 6 or 7. My wife came, and we shipped as many orders as we could. We got every single Camofire order shipped and out the door. I think we got, if my memory serves me, we got all but 34 of the BlackOvis orders out. 4 of those were non-Arrow ID orders. 30 were Arrow ID orders, and all those were refunded and canceled before the bankruptcy was filed that day. My wife, I'm super proud of this, that I just felt like we needed to finish strong and with some integrity. Now, some people might say that like all the integrity was lost in the decision to file bankruptcy, and the irony is not lost on me. But I felt like whatever I could do within my power, we were gonna take care of the customers, because that was the most important to me. And my wife shipped the very last order, and we closed the doors, and I recorded a video I never posted, saying this is probably outside of the building, and I just kind of said thanks to everyone, and it was an emotional video, and I just said, there's no pot of gold at the end of my rainbow, but I was extraordinarily blessed, and thanked the people I worked with and the customers, and I thought that was the last day I would ever step foot in that building again. But that's not what happened.
I went back a few times. We went back a few times, and this narrative came out on the internet. People sniff out that I was getting text messages. Hey, I'm trying to put in an order. Is the site down? Is it broken?
Yeah.
And word starts spreading, and forums start, and Instagram comments come through, and I remember feeling just like, is this real? Is this really happening? And I have a sliver of skin in the game compared to you and others, but I felt so strong about the team and what we were doing, and it was hard. That was really hard. I was very emotional when we brought everyone in the break room and told them, and whatever, right? It's this perception of people created these realities of what they thought was happening, and
I don't fault anyone at all, because the reality is people were looking through. Imagine a fence, and there's a hole in the fence, or a slit between the rails, and people are seeing what they can see through that hole or through that cut between the rails. And they think they can describe the entirety of the landscape beyond the fence. But the truth of the matter is they can't, because they just don't see it. But I don't fault the narrative that was created. I fault a little bit of the unfairness that was pitched at me, because the perception was that it was still my company, that I still controlled everything, that I was still making all the decisions, that I decided to shut the company down. Yeah. How could I do that? All the people that were shouldered with now debts they couldn't service, or that couldn't be paid. So I don't fault people for drawing conclusions that I think were incorrect, because they just didn't have visibility to it. And I've wanted to, long before now, to try and at least tell my side of the story. But unfortunately, I got wrapped up into something that was a lot more pressing than taking time to try and create the proper narrative, or a more, correct narrative.